Okay, part two. Part two. This is not my own opinion or studies, but who is criticizing of Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson, and he write the black spot on the web. So that's what I'm reading from this article. So it's continuing now, part two. My own understanding takes into account that there is no constant rate of mutation throughout history or across haplogroups. I agree with Jeanson about actual germ line testing of genetic demonstrate a faster mutation rate than the evolutionists propose. I also think location and environment and a cataclysmic event need to be taken account of in order to come to a correct understanding of how the genetic evidence relates to the historical world. What I believe it is good to remain skeptical of dating methodologies, my methodologies used by evolutionary scientists and their accuracy, such as radiocarbon and radiometric dating methodologies of archaeological remains and sites. I do think DNA testing of ancient remains is valid and helpful in tracing the movement of tribes and peoples. I also agree with Jeanson that the genetic evidence interpreted in the correct timescale gives the Y-DNA Adam, who is Noah, an origin of about 4,500 years ago, which I date to the birth of Noah rather than the flood which occurred about 4,000 years ago. However, I do not necessarily agree with the methodology that led to that conclusion by Dr. Jeanson. I do find some of Dr. Jeanson's proposals quite fascinating, such as his understanding of R1b and R1a coming into Europe in the Middle Age, and he sees their common ancestor of R1 around 300 to 200 BC. This is even more radical than my dating of the haplogroups. I date that R1 origin to about 1250 BC among the Israelites of the time of the judges. Jeanson associates the branch out of R1b as occurred between 1450 to 1550 AD. At the time of the Turkish invasion of Europe, and R1a with the coming of the Mongols to Russia and India. I date this movement of R1a and R1b to the period after 500 BC, with the movement of the last tribes of Israel into Europe. However, for argument's sake, if Jeanson is correct about R1a and R1b, this would confirm that the large influx of Turkish people of R1b came into the Middle East and Europe, and R1a Mongolic, Slavic into India and Russia, with the destructions of the southern hemisphere around 1320 to 1530 AD. However, this would not be the movement of tribes descended from Joktan himself, but the Israelite of the tribe of Reuben, R1b. This is now also correct. Why the Reuben is R1b? Supposed to be J J1 and J2, either one. And Manasseh is a different mother, which is a Rachel, not Leah, is a why Manasseh is R1a. Okay, it's continuing reading. Manasseh R1a and Gad I1. Gad is also the different mother named Zilpah, concubine of Leah. Okay, so this writer is also state that I don't agree with. However, this would not be movement of tribes descended from Joktan himself, but Israelite of the tribe of Reuben R1b, Manasseh R1a, and Gad I1, coming from the former lands associated with the Joktan in ancient times. In this possible scenario, the main movement of Gad may represent the Gothic invasions of Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire of the Vikings coming to Europe via Russia and Mongolia. However, Jeanson associates I and J with the Japhetites of Europe. I think it is more nuanced than this, but I am always open to being wrong and convinced by a more plausible scenario based on all the evidence. I am more agree with the Jeanson, Dr. Jeanson, than this writer here, because of a lot of things have to be corrected. But let me continue. I do identify some of R1b-U152 with the Turkic or tribe of Reuben group, of which some is found today in Russia, and also some of R1a-Z93 of Manasseh as coming from Australia into the Middle East and India, and some of I1 of the tribe of Gad, with this period between 1320 to 1530 AD and after. However, I do not accept the more radical scenario of Jeanson in this regard. Jeanson associates the Persians with J2, whereas I would associate it with Iranians of Persian Jewish ancestry, among other groups. J2 spread east after the Babylonian exile, which I dated to 460 BC, and it is spread into Europe mainly after the Roman exile in 70 AD. In my interpretation, I hold that the core haplogroup of the Shammai Pharisees were J1 and E1b, Y-DNA. The core haplogroup of the Sadducee was J2, and the core group of the Hillel Pharisees was R1b-Z2103. R1b Jews seems to be the most open to converting to Christianity over the centuries, and were the groups in Western and Central Europe most decimated in the Shoah, especially those Dutch, French, and German Jews of R1b-U106 of the tribe of Zebulun, and of a branch of the Davidic house of R1b-DF90A YDNA, and the R1b-U152 of the tribe of Reuben, descended from the Radhanite Jews, and those R1b Jews of the Davidic house of Nathan of R1b-L21. Many of the R1B Sephardi Jews, 30% of Sephardi Jews and R1B converso Jews, 55% of Jewish converso families today come from R1B-DF27 of the tribe of Simeon. That's interesting. I thought that the Simeon and the Levites are very close to each other. My opinion is that J1 is to be originally J1, Aaron, sons of Aaron, CMH, Kohen model haplotype. J1 is a Levite and a Simeon, and J2 is a Reuben and a Judah. Okay, and my concluded study that I1 is Zebulun and I2 is Issachar. Okay, so this person really confused what he's writing. I would assume that Dr. Jeanson groups all of the descendants of Japheth and Shem under IJK, Y-DNA, and all other Y-DNA haplogroups are Ham. He further identifies the descendant of IJ, Y-DNA as Japheth and K, XIJ, Y-DNA as Shem. I think both the evolutionist and creationist reliance on an interpretation based on MRCA, most recent common ancestor, that assumes that there is a constant rate of mutations over history and that today's conditions can be assumed for the past, distort their conclusions. While I am happy for them to propose these ideas, I do not feel bound to be locked into such a methodology. Primary for me is finding a scenario of interpretation which fit with the actual written historical records and account, as well as the mythologies and legend recorded by the ancient. Then, with the evidence, one can examine the archaeological and geological evidence in a time scale that matches the primary evidence of the historical written records. After that, one can then take the genetic evidence into account, interpreted in a scenario or proposal that correlate with the primary and secondary evidence. However, even with the primary evidence, I fine-tune my interpretation or world view based on an acceptance of the Judeo-Christian biological account and oral traditions and the insight of the Catholic mystical saint or visionaries, just as other evolutionists or creationists fine-tune their ideas based on their philosophical and or theological worldviews. My interpretation in simply rough chart form. So, So I will come back with the mappings of the details of what these writers are saying about is tribe of Israel, and so the comment of this writer, one comment from the another person, right? Anonymous. He didn't put his name. Hello, sir. I have been reading through your blogs for a couple of years. I had a test done a couple years back, and using some of my DNA markers as search words, I found your blogs. Told I cannot find any way to contact you directly. I have found many of the markers you describe in my result. So many I have become enamored with researching my family history, yet in following my paternal line, I cannot get past my grandfather as we have a family history of distant fathers. I am no expert in this field by any means, but according to my result, my main lineage is of the M343, R1b, M269, and from reading your blog, I have also found myself to be directly descended from at least 5 of Leah's children, as well as the Nathan bloodline you have described, as well as the marker you have possibly identified as Noah. Anyways, I would like to have an open dialogue with you if possible. Could you possibly post a way of contacting you privately on your page? I would like to discuss this with you, or even have you take a look at some of my results to maybe help me get a better grasp on my heritage. Something God has pointed out to me is found in in 1 Chronicles 2:33, Perez and Zara, specifically Zaza, but afterward there is absolutely no information on this man anywhere. Any help you can afford would be very appreciated. Thank you for your time. So this is one comment from the leader from this comment, but I don't take it seriously because of this formation is own doctrine of a person who write and categorize the DNA map of a tribe of Israel, and also the criticize of the Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson. So that I would not say he's right or this man is right, okay, wrong or right, but the conclusion that I see the differences, in my opinion, so have to be corrected. Okay, so this is part two, and I'm coming with showing the map what he put on the map.